The rain started before dawn. Not the soft kind of rain that comforts people to sleep. This rain sounded angry. It slammed against the church windows like fists demanding to be let inside. I sat motionless in the back seat of the black car, staring at my trembling hands while the driver quietly opened my door. "Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered gently. "We're here." Here. As if there was a word big enough for the place where your entire life ended. I stepped outside slowly. The cold air hit my lungs so sharply it almost hurt. At the top of the church stairs stood dozens of people dressed in black, umbrellas trembling beneath the storm. Family. Friends. Business partners. Neighbors. People who loved Daniel. People who would go home tonight and continue living. Unlike me. My heels clicked weakly against the wet stone steps as I climbed toward the church doors. Every step felt impossible. Because somewhere inside my shattered heart, I still believed Daniel should have been waiting for me there. Smiling. Teasing me for being late. Pulling me close while whispering, "You always make an entrance." But Daniel Whitmore was lying inside a coffin instead. 34 years old. A brilliant attorney. A loyal husband. The only person who had ever truly loved me. Gone because a drunk driver crossed a highway divider at 2 a.m. Killed instantly. That was what the police officer said. Killed instantly. As though those words were supposed to comfort me. I reached the church entrance. And there she was. Margaret Whitmore. My mother-in-law. Dressed in black velvet with diamonds glimmering at her ears. Perfect posture. Perfect makeup. Perfect hatred burning in her eyes. For 3 years she had made it painfully clear that I was never good enough for her son. I came from nothing. My father was an alcoholic mechanic. My mother died cleaning hotel rooms. I worked as a waitress when Daniel met me. To Margaret, I was trash that somehow slipped into her wealthy family. And now her son was dead. Which meant, in her mind, I had finally ruined him completely. She didn't speak as I approached. She only stared. Cold. Sharp. Accusing. Then she turned away. As if looking at me physically disgusted her. My chest tightened painfully. I walked inside the church. The scent of white lilies nearly made me sick. Daniel hated lilies. He once joked they smelled like funerals. The memory stabbed straight through me. At the front of the church sat the dark mahogany coffin. Closed. I was grateful for that. I had already seen Daniel's body at the hospital. That image would haunt me forever. The bruising. The blood near his temple. The unnatural stillness. No wife should ever see the love of her life look like that. I sat alone in the second pew. People whispered around me. She looks devastated. Poor thing. I heard they were trying for a baby. Every sentence felt like another knife. Yes. We had been trying for a baby. Daniel wanted a daughter. He already picked her name. Emma. Now the nursery upstairs in our house would stay empty forever. The organ music began. Low. Heavy. Funeral music sounds different when it belongs to someone you love. It doesn't sound holy. It sounds cruel. The priest began speaking about heaven. About peace. About eternal rest. But there is nothing peaceful about watching your future lowered into a box. My fingers dug into the edge of the pew as the slideshow began. Daniel at 6 years old holding a baseball glove. Daniel graduating law school. Daniel dancing with me at our wedding. Daniel kissing my forehead in our kitchen while flour covered my nose. I broke. A sob escaped my throat before I could stop it. Then another. Then another. I pressed my hand against my mouth, humiliated by the sound of my grief. But grief doesn't care about dignity. A memory slammed into me suddenly. 3 nights before the accident. Daniel standing in our bedroom loosening his tie. You work too hard, I told him. And you worry too much. He smiled before pulling me into his arms. I'm serious, Claire. After this case is over, we're leaving this city for a while. What? I bought a lake house. I laughed in disbelief. You bought a whole lake house without telling me? I wanted to surprise you. You're insane. I'm in love. Then his expression softened. You deserve peace, Claire. Nobody had ever said words like that to me before Daniel. Nobody had ever looked at me like I mattered. The memory crushed my lungs. Because now none of it would happen. No lake house. No children. No growing old together. Just silence. The funeral service ended slowly. People stood one by one to share memories. Funny stories. Stories about Daniel helping strangers. Stories about his generosity. Every story made me love him more. And miss him harder. Finally the priest announced the final viewing before burial. People formed a line toward the coffin. I stayed seated. I couldn't move. My body felt numb. Then suddenly someone touched my shoulder. Margaret. Her nails dug painfully into my skin. You should stand beside your husband, she said quietly. The words sounded polite. But the venom underneath them was unmistakable. I stood slowly. Together we walked toward the coffin. The church grew silent. Everyone watching. Margaret stared at the casket. Then at me. You cried beautifully today. I blinked in confusion. What? You always did know how to perform. My stomach dropped. Margaret, please. My son is dead because of you. The word struck like a physical blow. Several people gasped. I stared at her. I loved your son. You manipulated him. That's not true. He was driving home to you when he died. My face drained of color. Because that part was true. Hours before the accident, I had called Daniel crying after a terrible nightmare. I'm scared, I told him. I'll come home early, he said immediately. If I never made that call, would he still be alive? The guilt already haunted me every second. Margaret saw the pain on my face. And smiled. A cruel, satisfied smile. There it is, she whispered. You know it too. Tears filled my eyes instantly. I never asked him to speed. But you always needed attention. That's enough, someone muttered nearby. Margaret ignored them. My son had everything before he met you. I shook violently. You don't mean that. Oh, I do. Then suddenly. Slap. The sound exploded through the church. My head snapped sideways.
Pain burned across my cheek. For one horrifying second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Margaret's hand still hovered in the air. You should have died instead of him. The words shattered something inside me. A woman screamed. Someone rushed forward, but I couldn't hear them anymore. My ears rang violently. My cheek burned, and deep inside me, grief transformed into something darker, something colder. Hatred. Margaret had humiliated me in front of everyone, at my husband's funeral. And the worst part, a piece of me believed her. I stumbled backward, unable to breathe, unable to think. Then I turned and walked out of the church alone, while whispers exploded behind me. The rain soaked me instantly, but I barely felt it. I reached the parking lot before collapsing beside a black iron fence. My entire body shook violently. I pressed my hands against my face and screamed, not a graceful cry, not movie tears, a raw animal sound, ripped from the deepest part of my soul. I screamed until my throat burned, because Daniel was dead, and now his mother had taken the last thing grief hadn't already stolen from me, my dignity. 3 days after the funeral, I discovered Daniel had been hiding secrets. Dangerous secrets. I sat alone in our dark kitchen staring at unpaid sympathy cards piled across the table. People wrote the same meaningless things. He's in a better place. Stay strong. Time heals. Lies. Time doesn't heal grief. It teaches you how to suffer quietly. I hadn't slept properly since the accident. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashing police lights. I heard the officer say there was nothing they could do. At noon, Daniel's law partner arrived unexpectedly. Richard Cole, tall, gray-haired, nervous. He held a leather folder tightly against his chest. "Claire," he said carefully, "may I come in?" Something about his expression frightened me. I stepped aside, silently. He entered the kitchen and remained standing. That alone told me something was wrong. "Richard," he swallowed hard. "There are things Daniel didn't want you involved in." Cold fear slid down my spine. "What things?" Richard hesitated, then opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, bank statements, and one picture that changed everything. Margaret, standing beside a man I recognized instantly from the news. Victor Salazar, a real estate billionaire currently under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. I stared at the image. "What is this?" Richard lowered his voice. Daniel was preparing evidence against Salazar before he died. I frowned. "What does Margaret have to do with it?" Richard looked deeply uncomfortable. "Your mother-in-law has been secretly helping Salazar move money through charitable foundations." I froze. "No, I'm sorry. That's impossible." "It isn't." He slid more papers toward me. Wire transfers, private meetings, shell companies, millions of dollars. My hands began trembling. "Daniel found out." Richard nodded. He was going to expose everything. My heartbeat slowed, a terrifying thought forming. How did Daniel's accident happen exactly? Richard's silence answered before his mouth did. The room tilted. "No, the police ruled it drunk driving," Richard whispered. "But Daniel called me 20 minutes before the crash." Every hair on my body stood up. He sounded frightened. The air vanished from my lungs. "What did he say?" Richard looked toward the window. He said, "If anything happened to him, I should protect you." I nearly collapsed. Then Richard said the sentence that changed my grief into war. He believed someone was following him. Silence. Heavy. Deadly. My mind replayed the funeral. Margaret's rage. Her hatred. Her desperation. Was it grief or fear? Richard slid a flash drive across the table. Daniel left backups of everything. I stared at it. Tiny. Black. Powerful enough to destroy lives. He wanted to expose them after gathering final evidence. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because someone broke into Daniel's office last night. Ice flooded my veins. They're looking for the evidence." Richard's eyes locked onto mine. "And I think you're in danger." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the slap. Not the pain. The expression on Margaret's face afterward. Not satisfaction. Panic, as if she feared something bigger than grief. At 2:14 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something inside me answered. "Hello." Silence. Then breathing. Slow. Heavy. "Claire." My blood froze. "Margaret, what do you want?" "You met Richard today." My heart stopped. How did she know? "You need to stop asking questions," she said coldly. Fear exploded through me. "You had Daniel killed." The silence that followed terrified me more than words. Then she laughed softly, a sound completely empty of warmth. "You think grief makes you dangerous?" My fingers tightened around the phone. "You ruined your own son." "Careful, Claire. Did you love him at all?" I screamed. Her voice sharpened Instantly. You know nothing about love. The line disconnected. I stared at the phone, shaking. Then another realization hit me. Margaret hadn't denied it. She never denied it. That was the moment revenge entered my heart completely. Not petty revenge, not screaming matches. I wanted truth. I wanted justice. And I wanted Margaret Whitmore to lose everything the same way I had. The next week became a nightmare. Someone followed me constantly. Black SUV, tinted windows, always near, at grocery stores, outside my house, across the street at night. I stopped sleeping entirely. Then one evening I found my house destroyed, drawers emptied, furniture overturned, pictures shattered, Daniel's office ripped apart. I called the police, but deep down I already knew they were searching for the evidence. The flash drive. Fortunately, I had hidden it inside an old flour container in the kitchen. The police asked routine questions, took photographs, promised investigation. Meaningless. By midnight, the house felt poisoned. Every room reminded me of Daniel. His coffee mug still beside the sink. His jacket hanging near the stairs. His cologne lingering faintly in our bedroom. I finally opened the flash drive. Folders filled the screen. Emails, audio recordings, financial ledgers. Then one file caught my attention. Margaret_call_recording. My pulse quickened. I clicked play. Margaret's voice filled the room. Cold. Controlled. If Daniel goes to the authorities, we all fall. A man answered. Victor Salazar. He's your son. And he's become a liability. I stopped breathing. Victor lowered his voice. What exactly are you suggesting? Silence. Then Margaret whispered. Handle it. The recording ended. I dropped the laptop. My body went numb. She did it. She actually did it. A mother ordered the death of her own son because money mattered more. Power mattered more. I ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. The truth was too monstrous, too evil. But beneath the horror, rage began rising inside me like fire. Daniel died because he was honest, because he tried to do the right thing, and his own mother murdered him. I looked into the mirror. My face appeared hollow, broken, but my eyes looked different, harder. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't helpless anymore. Revenge requires patience. That was the first thing Richard told me. You can't go to the police yet, he warned. Why not? Because Salazar owns half the city. I hated that he was right. Money protects monsters, especially rich ones. So we planned carefully. For weeks I pretended to grieve, quietly, pretended to break, pretended Margaret had destroyed me. Meanwhile, Richard secretly copied every file Daniel collected. We contacted a federal investigator named Elena Ruiz. Smart, careful, impossible to intimidate. When she listened to the recording, even she looked shaken. Your mother-in-law is dangerous, she said. I know. No, Elena replied quietly. I don't think you fully do. She explained everything. Victor Salazar had bribed politicians, destroyed witnesses, ruined businesses. People disappeared around him. And Margaret had helped him for years. Why? Because she loved power. Her late husband built an investment empire before dying. Afterward, Margaret secretly began losing money. Bad deals, gambling, luxury addiction. Salazar saved her financially. In exchange for loyalty, Daniel discovered everything accidentally while reviewing legal records. Instead of protecting his mother, he chose justice, and she chose survival. I cried for hours after learning the full truth, not because I pitied Margaret, because Daniel must have felt devastated. Imagine discovering your own mother was corrupt. Imagine realizing she might destroy innocent lives. and still trying to save her. Because despite everything, he loved her. That was Daniel. Too good for this world. Weeks passed. Then Margaret invited me to dinner. The message arrived unexpectedly. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for several minutes, then smiled slowly, because finally it was time. Margaret's mansion looked exactly the same. Cold, expensive, empty. I remembered the first time Daniel brought me there. Margaret looked me up and down before saying, "She's prettier than your usual mistakes." Daniel laughed awkwardly. I should have walked away then. Instead, I spent years trying to earn love from a woman incapable of giving it. The maid led me into the dining room. Margaret sat at the end of the long table, sipping wine. She wore white this time, not black, almost as if mourning no longer mattered. "You look terrible," she said. I sat quietly. "You invited me here to insult me?" "No." She studied me carefully. "You've been asking questions." I forced my breathing steady. "About my husband's death." "Yes." A flicker passed through her eyes. "He's gone, Claire." "You don't sound sad." She leaned back. "Grief fades." My hatred deepened. "How long did yours take?" 3 days. Her expression darkened. "You think you understand pain?" "No," I said softly. "I think you understand greed." Silence exploded between us. Then Margaret smiled. A terrifying smile. "You should be careful." "Is that a threat?" "That depends." She folded her napkin carefully. "Did Daniel leave anything behind?" There it was. The real reason for the invitation. Not guilt, not reconciliation. Fear. I lowered my eyes, pretending uncertainty. I found some files. Margaret's attention sharpened instantly. "What files?" "I don't understand them." "Where are they?" I looked up slowly. "Why did you have him killed?" For the first time since meeting her, Margaret looked shocked. Real shock. Then fury. "You stupid girl." Her voice trembled with rage. "You have no idea what this family sacrificed to survive. You murdered your son. He betrayed me." The words echoed through the room. My stomach twisted. No regret, no sadness, nothing, just selfishness. "You're evil." Margaret stood suddenly. "And you are weak." Daniel ruined himself because he loved weak people. I slowly removed my phone from my purse, then pressed stop recording. Margaret's eyes widened, and for the first time in her life, I watched fear enter them. "You little bitch." I stood. "No, I'm the woman who's going to destroy you." She lunged toward me, but before she reached me, the dining room doors burst open. Federal agents flooded the room. "Elena Ruiz, FBI." Margaret froze, shock consuming her face. Agents surrounded her instantly. She looked at me in horror. I stepped closer. "You slapped me at my husband's funeral," I whispered. Her breathing quickened. "But this—" I stared directly into her eyes. "This is for Daniel." The arrest became national news. Prominent socialite arrested in corruption scandal. Attorney's death reopened as possible homicide. Whitmore family empire under investigation. Reporters surrounded my house daily. I ignored them all because revenge didn't feel the way I imagined. It didn't heal me. It didn't bring Daniel back. It only made the world quieter. Margaret was denied bail. Victor Salazar disappeared before authorities found him. Richard believed he fled the country, but Margaret remained trapped, and she requested to see me. Everyone told me not to go. I went anyway. The prison visitation room smelled like bleach and hopelessness. Margaret entered wearing an orange uniform. No diamonds, no makeup, no elegance. She looked older, smaller, human. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "Did you enjoy humiliating me?" I stared at her. "You humiliated yourself." Her jaw tightened. "I built everything for my family." "You destroyed your family." Her eyes flickered, pain finally appearing beneath the arrogance. "I never wanted Daniel dead." I laughed bitterly. "You ordered it. I thought they would scare him." I went still. "What?" Her voice cracked. "I didn't know Salazar would kill him." Tears filled her eyes. Real tears. For the first time. He was my son. I stared at her silently. Part of me wanted to hate her forever. Another part saw a broken woman drowning in consequences. "I hear him sometimes," she whispered. My chest tightened. "What?" "At night." Her face crumpled. "I hear him calling me Mom." Suddenly she began sobbing, violently, ugly, broken sobs. "I loved him," she cried. "God help me, I loved him." I sat frozen, because grief is complicated. Monsters can love people too. That is what makes them terrifying. Margaret looked up desperately. "Do you hate me?" I thought about the funeral, the slap, the humiliation, the lies, the death. Then I answered honestly, "Yes." She nodded slowly. "As you should." I stood to leave, then stopped. "There's one thing I need to know." Margaret looked at me weakly. "Did Daniel suffer?" The question shattered her. "No." Her voice trembled. "The crash killed him instantly." I closed my eyes. Thank God. At least there was that. Before leaving, I turned back once more. "He loved you," I said quietly. Margaret broke completely, because that was the cruelest truth of all. Daniel loved her until the end, and she destroyed him anyway. 6 months later, winter covered the city in silence. I visited Daniel's grave every Sunday, not because grief faded, because love remained. Snow covered the cemetery softly. I knelt beside the headstone. Daniel Whitmore, beloved husband, beloved son. I traced the letters carefully. "I did it," I whispered. Cold wind moved through the trees. "I finished what you started." The investigation destroyed dozens of corrupt officials. Salazar was eventually captured in Spain. Margaret accepted a plea deal and confessed publicly. The newspapers called her heartless, evil, monstrous. Maybe she was. But I no longer cared about revenge, because revenge has an expiration date. Eventually, the anger burns away, and all that remains is grief. I sat quietly beside Daniel's grave, remembering ordinary things. The way he danced terribly in the kitchen, the way he kissed my forehead before work, the way he always reached for my hand in crowds. Love survives death in strange ways, sometimes in memories, sometimes in pain, sometimes in the person grief forces you to become. I heard footsteps behind me. "Richard." He smiled gently. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, for the first time in a long while, maybe. He placed flowers near the grave. "Daniel would be proud of you." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "I miss him every second." "I know." We stood together in silence. Then Richard handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "Daniel wrote it before he died." My hands shook violently. "You never gave this to me." He told me to wait until everything was over. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. "Claire, if you're reading this, something went terribly wrong. First, I need you to know this. None of this was your fault. Not 1 second of it. You loved me better than anyone ever has. And if my mother blames you, don't believe her. People destroy things when they're afraid. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what's coming, but I know you. You are stronger than you think. And one day, when the anger finally quiets, I hope you choose happiness again, not because you stopped loving me, but because loving me should never become your prison. You once asked what my favorite moment of life was. It wasn't law school, or winning cases, or success. It was the night you fell asleep on my chest while rain hit the windows, and you whispered, "I finally feel safe." That was my favorite moment, because you trusted me with your heart. Thank you for loving me, Claire. For every second. Forever yours, Daniel. By the time I finished reading, I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Richard quietly stepped away to give me privacy. I pressed the letter against my chest, and for the first time since the funeral, my tears felt different. Not only grief, love, pure love, the kind death cannot erase. I looked up at the gray winter sky. "I still love you," I whispered. The wind moved softly through the cemetery trees, and somehow, for one impossible moment, it felt like he heard me. The nightmares became worse after Margaret's arrest. I thought revenge would help me sleep. Instead, it made the silence louder. Every night I woke up hearing Daniel's voice. Sometimes I dreamed he was still alive, that the accident never happened, that he would walk through the front door smiling while loosening his tie. Then morning came, and reality murdered me all over again. One stormy evening, I found one of Daniel's old sweaters hidden beneath our bed. Dark gray, soft cotton, still carrying traces of his cologne. The second I pressed it against my face, I collapsed onto the floor, crying. Memories flooded me violently. Our first apartment, too small, leaking ceiling, broken heater. But Daniel loved that apartment because it was ours. One winter night, the power went out during a snowstorm. I panicked because we had no heat. Daniel lit candles around the living room and wrapped blankets around both of us. Then he pulled out cheap instant noodles. "We're officially surviving the apocalypse," he declared dramatically. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. Hours later, I fell asleep against his chest while snow covered the windows outside. Back then we had almost nothing, but I had never felt richer. The memory hurt so badly I could barely breathe, because grief is cruel that way. It doesn't only take people, it takes entire futures. I never stopped wondering what our children would have looked like. Would our daughter have Daniel's smile? Would our son inherit his kindness? Those thoughts haunted me constantly. One afternoon while cleaning the attic, I discovered a cardboard box labeled, "For our future baby." My hands began shaking instantly. Inside were tiny clothes, children's books, a stuffed rabbit, and handwritten letters. Daniel had secretly been writing letters to our future child. I opened one carefully. "Hey, little one, if you're reading this someday, your mother is probably pretending she isn't crying right now. She cries during movies, commercials, animal videos, basically everything. But she's also the strongest person I've ever met. I hope you inherit her heart, because it saved me." I broke completely. The pain became unbearable. I curled against the attic wall sobbing until sunset, not because Daniel was gone, because he would have been such a wonderful father. And the world stole that from him. That night, I drove aimlessly through the city, unable to stop crying. Eventually, I found myself outside the hospital where they brought Daniel after the crash. The parking lot looked exactly the same. The fluorescent lights, the empty benches, the automatic doors. My chest tightened violently. I remembered every second of that horrible night. The police officer knocking at my door, the way my knees gave out immediately, the drive to the hospital, the doctor refusing to meet my eyes, and the worst moment of all, seeing Daniel's wedding ring placed inside a plastic evidence bag. I sat in the parking lot shaking. Then suddenly someone knocked on my window. I startled violently. An older nurse stood outside, looking concerned. "You okay, sweetheart?" I rolled the window down slowly. The woman studied my face carefully. Then recognition appeared. "You're Daniel Whitmore's wife." My throat tightened. "Yes." The nurse's expression softened instantly. "I was there that night." The world seemed to stop. "You saw him?" She nodded. Tears filled her eyes. "He wasn't alone when he died." I stopped breathing. "What?" The nurse swallowed hard. "He was conscious for less than a minute after they pulled him from the car." My entire body trembled. "No, they told me he died instantly. They didn't want you carrying this pain." I stared at her in horror. "He said your name." Tears exploded down my face. The nurse's voice cracked, over and over. I covered my mouth, sobbing. He kept saying, "Tell Claire I'm sorry." The grief hit me so hard I physically doubled over. The nurse reached through the window, holding my hand gently, and then he smiled. I looked up through blurred tears. He smiled. He said, "I got to love her." That sentence shattered me completely. I cried so violently the nurse eventually pulled me into her arms right there in the parking lot. Because even in death, Daniel's final thoughts were about love, not fear, not pain. Love. Margaret's trial began in spring. The courthouse overflowed with reporters. People wanted to see the monster mother who destroyed her own son. But when Margaret entered the courtroom, she no longer looked powerful. She looked haunted, thin, exhausted, destroyed by guilt. I sat only a few feet away, while prosecutors revealed everything publicly: the corruption, the money laundering, the threats, the recorded phone calls. Then came the worst part, Daniel's final voicemail. The courtroom fell silent as his voice filled the speakers. "Richard, if something happens to me, protect Claire. And please don't let my mother destroy herself trying to hide this." Even the judge looked emotional. Margaret lowered her head and began silently crying. For the first time in her life, there was nobody left to impress. Nobody left to manipulate. Only consequences. When prosecutors asked me to testify, my knees nearly gave out. I walked slowly toward the witness stand. Margaret looked at me, not with hatred anymore, with shame. The prosecutor asked softly, "Mrs. Whitmore, how did your husband's death affect your life?" The question sounded simple, but grief is impossible to summarize. I stared at Daniel's photograph displayed on the courtroom screen, then answered honestly. It destroyed every version of my future. The room went silent. I swallowed hard. My husband wasn't perfect, but he was good. Tears filled my eyes instantly. He made people feel safe, loved, important. I looked toward Margaret, and the cruelest part is he never stopped loving his mother. Margaret broke into sobs, violent, uncontrollable sobs. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, because no matter how terrible she was, watching a mother realize she caused her son's death felt horrifying. The prosecutor asked one final question. "What do you want from this court?" I thought carefully before answering. "I want the truth remembered." The courtroom remained silent. Daniel Whitmore died, trying to do the right thing. That matters. When I stepped down from the witness stand, Margaret whispered my name. "Claire." I stopped. Her face looked broken. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Too late, but real. I stared at her for several seconds, then quietly replied, "So, am I?" Months after the trial ended, loneliness became its own kind of battle. People think grief is loud. At first it is. Then it becomes quiet, and somehow that feels worse. Friends slowly stopped calling. Neighbors stopped checking on me. The world moved forward. Mine didn't. One night I sat alone watching old videos of Daniel on my laptop. Daniel burning pancakes. Daniel dancing badly at a barbecue. Daniel pretending to cry after losing board games. I laughed through tears. Then, suddenly another video appeared. Unopened. Recorded 2 weeks before his death. Confused, I clicked play. Daniel appeared sitting in our kitchen, smiling nervously. Okay, he laughed awkwardly. If you're watching this, either I'm dead or Richard finally listened to instructions. My heart stopped. Daniel rubbed his face. I know you're angry right now, probably crying too. I burst into tears immediately. There's something I never told you. His expression softened. The first night I saw you at the diner, you looked exhausted. I remembered that night instantly. Double shift. Bills overdue. I almost ignored him when he sat in my section. You smiled at every customer except me, Daniel said, laughing softly. So I came back 3 nights in a row trying to earn one. Tears streamed down my face. And when you finally smiled, he shook his head slowly. I knew my life had changed. I covered my mouth, sobbing. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. Claire, listen carefully. His eyes filled with emotion. You were never lucky to be loved by me. My chest shattered. I was the lucky one. I cried harder than I had in months, because grief tricks people into forgetting their worth. But Daniel never did, even after death. He was still trying to save me. 1 year after Daniel's death, I opened the lake house, the one he secretly bought for us. Small, quiet, beautiful, a place filled with trees and water instead of corruption and pain. I almost sold it. Instead, I turned it into a retreat center for women escaping abusive situations. Women abandoned, broken, lost. Women like the version of me who once believed she deserved cruelty. The first night the center opened, rain tapped gently against the windows. I stood alone on the porch holding a cup of coffee. And suddenly I remembered that funeral day. The slap, the hatred, the humiliation. Back then I thought my life ended beside Daniel's coffin. But endings are strange. Sometimes they become beginnings disguised as pain. I looked toward the dark lake, then smiled softly. Good night, Daniel. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence no longer felt empty.